Well, hello. Welcome to another segment of Can With Me. Today we are canning Cowboy candy. I just think for a minute what it was. Let me go over some basic equipment for this project. I'm using a water bath canner for this one. I picked this up at Aldi's, I think for 15 bucks. I don't know how big it was, but it's the bigger one. It came with a canning rack. This is essential. Whenever you can, you have to have a rack at the bottom of your pot, otherwise your jars will break because they can't take the direct heat. When I'm doing my Cowboy candy in half pint jars or like the jelly jars, I like to use this kind of rack because this folds over and sort of secures the jars in the water. Alright, so that's basic equipment here. You also need a funnel. You need one of these little thingies. This measures head space for me. Oh, I forgot to bring out my jar lifters. And my jar lifters. Oh, also, this is important for this particular project. Rubber gloves, because I'm cutting hot peppers. So, this canner has a lid. My tripod is sitting on it right now, so I'm not going to show you the lid, but you know what a lid looks like, right? I'm just going to get some water going in that. First thing we're going to do is gather our ingredients and start chopping up our jalapenos. This calls for each recipe for I think a pound of jalapenos. Let me check here. Yep. Pound of jalapenos, or 4 to 5 cups of them. So I'm going to get everything out and then I'll bring you back. Okay, I think I've got all my ingredients gathered up, and what I'm going to do first is I'm going to mix up the brine and get that going. So my recipe calls for 2 cups of sugar. I thought I was going to be smart and put my gloves on before, but it's harder to open up everything. 2 cups of just plain old white sugar. There is no tested sugar-free or low sugar recipe for this, although I'm sure, you know, there could be a substitute for the sugar here. I'm just going to do it the old-fashioned way because that's the way I like it. That's the way my kids like it. Okay, 2/3 cup of apple cider vinegar. Now, normally I would use the good stuff with the mother in it, but I don't have it. I just have the regular stuff because my son bought it for me. I wasn't specific enough. So just regular apple cider vinegar. I tried making apple cider vinegar one year from all my apple scraps after I was making applesauce. Yeah, it exploded all over my ceiling. That was interesting. Alright, 2/3 cup of apple cider vinegar. And then a teaspoon of granulated garlic. That's sort of like a fancy word for garlic powder. One teaspoon. Oh, my 1 teaspoon is broken. 1 teaspoon. This is the stuff I got at the Amish store. It smells really good. Pretty sure it's done just recently. And then I have a 1/4 teaspoon of turmeric. Here's the turmeric. Sometimes I think a 1/4 teaspoon of this stuff doesn't hardly even make a difference, but apparently it does. And I don't level out my measuring spoons when I'm making this stuff. 1/4 teaspoon of celery seed. A 1/4 teaspoon of cayenne pepper. As if this isn't going to be hot enough. these jalapenos, the ones that I've tasted so far anyway, are very, very hot. You can make this not so hot by taking the seeds out. I like it hot and spicy, so I'm leaving the seeds in. That's a lot of work to take all those seeds out anyway. Alright, that is it for the brine. So the brine again was 2 cups of sugar. It was regular white sugar. 2/3 cup of apple cider vinegar. 1 teaspoon of, they call it granulated garlic. I call it garlic powder. The garlic powder that I used wasn't ground real fine though. 1/4 teaspoon of ground turmeric. 1/4 teaspoon of celery seed. 1/4 teaspoon of cayenne pepper. If I remember, I'll put the recipe down below. All right, and I'm going to give this a stir. Now I'm using my rubber spatula because of the vinegar. If you use metal, it can react, and by react, it'll change the color on it. I don't think it'll change the taste too much. So I'm just going to give this a stir. Then I'm going to put this over on the stove and set it on low to get this start rocking and rolling here. All right, and then I'll be back. Okay, so I have my jalapenos. They've already been washed and rinsed. And I'm going to take, you're probably not going to be able to see this because my camera won't angle down far enough. But I'm just going to take off the tops. See, just took off the top, and I'm going to discard that. I have my garbage bowl set up here, a little trick I learned from Rachel Ray. So, see that? That's fine. I'm going to leave everything in there. I'm just going to slice it, maybe 1/4 inch pieces. I have my measuring cup on my scale, and my scale is zeroed out and set to pounds because I want to measure out 1 pound. I'm going to be very careful not to slice my rubber gloves. I've done that before too. So I'm going to just keep doing that till I have my pound, and then I'll be back. Okay, so I have all of my, I have just a little bit over 1 pound. Came to about 5 cups. All my jalapenos. So now the next direction in my recipe here is to bring the brine to a boil, stirring occasionally, and then reduce to a simmer and allow to cook for 5 minutes, and during that 5 minutes stir occasionally. So I'm going to bring my brine up to a boil. I'll show it to you when we get there. We're not there yet. And then I'll be back. Okay, it has been simmering for 5 minutes. So I'm going to add now my jalapenos. I got it reach over here. And then I'm going to give it a stir. And then my directions say to return this to a boil. It also says it doesn't matter if they're all cooked evenly. So we're going to return this to a boil, then reduce the heat and let it simmer for 5 minutes again. So I'm just making sure that everything's covered in the juice. Okay, so we're going to reduce this to, or we're going to bring this back up to a boil, and then we're going to simmer it for 5 minutes. So let me get the heat turned back up. And then I'll be back. All right, I just want to show you, they've cooked now for 5 minutes. Now the instructions say now, I'm going to turn off the heat. And I am going, it says to use a slotted spoon now to remove the peppers. I don't have a slotted spoon, so I'm going to go another route. And I'll show that to you in a second. Boy, I gotta tell you, these are potent. So what I'm gonna do is I have a little colander set inside of a bowl. I'm gonna pour everything into that colander, and then I'm gonna dump the juice back into the pot. Now, when you do this, remember, everything is hot. And there we go. Now, I'm going to get another bowl here, because I don't want hot juice dripping all over my counter. So I'm going to let this drain for a minute. Kind of shake the juice off with these jalapenos. Those are potent. The next instruction then is to put the juice, or the brine, back into the pot. While I'm doing the next thing, I'm going to fill my jars. Okay, and then we're going to bring this to a hard boil for 5 minutes. Now remember, this is hot. Thermally hot. If I had a slotted spoon, I mean, I know I've got one somewhere. It's just not with me. If I had a slotted spoon, I would have used that. It would have eliminated this step. Okay, so now this is going back on the stove for 5 minutes, and I'll be back when I start filling my jar. When you do a recipe like this, it calls for a 1/4 inch head space. Now, a 1/4 inch, if you don't have one of these handy dandy dadges, you know, for me, it's, you know, I can just go like this, hold it straight up, and I know that the bottom of that marker right here is a 1/4 inch. If you don't have one of these, it's this top ring around the jar. Every jar is the same as far as the top is. Alright, I'm using a funnel to keep the ring around the jar as clean as possible. I have a bowl of white vinegar here that I will use to wipe the jar off with. So I'm just going to start filling these jars with these jalapenos. I think I'm going to use my plastic spoon here. Once I get them in here, I'll give them a shake. I'm not going to pack these down real far. I mean, the recipe says this should give you 2 pints. So I have 4 half pints here ready to go. Alright, so I put 2 spoonfuls in there, and I want you to see it's not up there. So I'm going to put a little bit more in here. You want to remember to use rubber gloves when you do this. Believe me, I didn't one year. I have to check my brine here. Okay, that's boiling. I'm going to set my timer for 5 minutes. Okay, I don't think I'm going to get 4 of these. It looks like maybe the recipe meant 2 half pints. And some change. After I get the brine in here, I'll take this end of this tool and go around the outside and remove any air bubbles. And the reason we do that is because sometimes if there's air down in there, it can cause it not to seal well. So, yeah, this is definitely not what the recipe said. So, I'm only going to get 2 half pints in here. That's kind of disappointing, but I have plenty of jalapenos. I'm going to make another recipe after this. I typically don't double recipes when I'm doing anything like this. It's just like making jelly and jam. You know, you need to follow the recipe well. You don't ever want to double a jam recipe, you know, because of the pectin amounts and everything. And same with a recipe like this, you don't want to double it. So I make several single batches, I don't care, and then I process them all at the same time. What I'll do is I'm going to hang these over the pot. My rack will open up and hang over the edges there to keep these warm at least until my second batch is ready. and or my third batch maybe, I don't know. I only have a dozen jelly jars, so, and that's what I'm using here. I'm using the jelly jars. But I mean, in a way, this is good because when I looked at that brine, I thought, gee, this is not a whole lot of brine. I didn't make this last year. Of course, I didn't do much canning at all last year, so I'm not going to wipe my rin yet until I get my brine in here. So all of my jalapenos are in here. You see they're not all the way to the top. So my brine is going to go up to that quarter inch mark. How are we doing here? 2 more minutes. So, all right, when I fill the jars, I'll be back. Okay, my 5 minutes is up, and I took it off of the heat, the brine off of the heat, and I am going to put it in the jars now. Cover the jalapenos back up in the jars. I don't want to use a metal scoop, so I'm using one of the plastic things. This is actually a measure for a giant cupcake. Right, so I'm going to carefully pour this into the jar. Remember, this is very hot. It just came off of the stove. Now, I'm going to move this around a little bit in here to get the brine all the way through. Very hot, sugary. Remember, this is candied stuff, so it's hot sugar. So you need to be very careful. Use a little bit more. And if you pour a little bit too much into the jar, you can just use a little spoon to get it out. When I start getting toward the top, I kind of like to take this funnel out. I hope I have enough brine here. Now, the other thing is, you don't have to can this. You could put this, after you cap it, you could put it into the refrigerator, and it will keep in your refrigerator in a glass jar for about 3 months. You don't have to go through the canning process if you would prefer to do that. But it's not shelf staple. I like to do it, to can it, you know, by canning I mean process it in the hot water bath, because then it's shelf staple. Alright, I'm getting all that brine down to the bottom of this jar. And it will cook some as you process it too. Add some more. Looks like I might have just enough brine. I gotta tell you, this is a sugary, thick, sticky mess. Which is why I use the vinegar to wipe off these jars, because otherwise, if you have anything prohibiting the seal, it won't, you know, it won't seal. You won't hear that pop. Which, you know, that gives me a total thrill when I hear the pop. So I'm going to get this, see if you can see this. This is just very thick syrup. And that is about, that's about 1/4 of an inch, maybe a little under. It reminds me of when I used to make Yule logs. I used to just like spin sugar to put around the Yule log, just, you know, for decoration, to make it look like it was sitting in snow. Okay, so those are filled. Before I do anything else, I'm going to get all this sugar residue off, and I have to use vinegar to do that because nothing else, it's sticking to me. Nothing else will cut it. And then I'm going to start the process all over again. Get this in the vinegar well. This white vinegar that I'm dipping in, if anything, if it drips into the jar, to the inside of the jar, it's not going to matter. This already has vinegar in it. Also, you need to make sure to wipe the outside, the outer rim, I have a rubber glove on, but I remember it's not a heat protective glove. So I'm going to go over this really well to make sure that there's none of that sugary syrup around the rim, on the top where the seal is going to set, or around the outer edge of the rim. By that I mean here, because that could make things difficult in getting the ring off. I never store my stuff with the rings on. It can create a false seal. So, and we don't want that. I've had that happen. I remember once when I canned a whole lot of spaghetti sauce, I was stacking the jars without a divider, and I went to open up one of the jars, and it had I had the ring on, and I didn't know that the seal had broken. And sometimes that will happen if you move the jars too quickly after you get them out of the canner. Whenever you can anything, you really need to let them sit undisturbed for about 24 hours. You want them completely cooled. You want that seal completely cooled and down. And then I remove the rings, and then I take a warm soapy cloth and I wipe off the jars before I put them on my shelf. That way the jars are all nice and shiny when I put them away. And I gotta tell you, I love at the end of the canning season, well, my canning season really never ends, but I love at the end of the canning season to look at my filled jars. Okay, so I'm putting the lids on here, and I keep wanting to touch that hot pan. Okay, so these are very hot. You screw it on just finger tight. You don't want to go nuts and and put it on super tight, because you need to allow the air to escape when you can. That helps with the seal. I mean, that is what makes it seal. So the escaping of the air, and it's science. All right, I have my jar lifters here, and I'm going to go over and put these over into my rack, and I'll show you that in just a second. All right, I'm washing off all of my utensils before I start my next batch. So you can see how the lip of this hangs over the rack on both sides. Now I have my water heated. It's not boiling or anything. I have it turned on like a medium heat because I want the bottom of that water to stay warm on the bottom of those jars. When this rack is filled, I will lower it in here. And you also want to make sure that you have about 2 inches of water covering these jars. So, and then I'll bring that to a boil and process for 10 minutes once it starts boiling. So, alright, I'll be back when I have this canner filled. I have more stuff to make. Alright, I've got all my jars. So I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 half pints out of all those jalapenos. I've got them all in the canner. I'm going to cover this now and wait for it to boil. Once that happens, I will start the timer for 10 minutes. So I'll be back when that happens. Let's put the cover on. The lid is on, and I'm going to start the timer. Here is the finished product. I got 6 half pints of the Cowboy candy. These are candied jalapenos. I'm going to just let them chill out here in this tray for overnight. And tomorrow I'll wipe off the jars and get them on my shelf. So all done.